Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Okay, so in this session, we're doing something really fascinating. We are breaking down a highly talked about viral video's claims regarding Jim Chalmers' historic budget. But, more importantly, we're looking at how the source argues this budget is fundamentally trying to shift generational wealth in Australia. Whether you're a massive economics nerd or you're just, trying to figure out what this all means for your own financial future, we're going to lay it all out clearly, using the data and arguments directly from the source material. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The central ideological thesis of this analysis kicks off with a massive claim. Labor creates markets, liberals create monopolies. Now look, whether you agree with the politics of that or not, it serves as the exact lens for the entire economic breakdown we are about to explore. The source uses this quote, which is originally attributed to former Prime Minister Paul Keating, to argue that the current budget is essentially designed to break up modern economic monopolies. Specifically, they mean monopolies in real estate, with the goal of returning to a system that actually rewards active market innovation.
To unpack all of this, we're going to cover 6 key areas: a historic economic reset, the housing investment problem, shifting wealth to innovation, closing family trust loopholes, expanding the housing supply, and finally, a long-term economic vision. Starting right off with Section 1, a historic economic reset.
Let's see how this all builds up historically. The source frames this budget not just as a random set of new policies, but actually as a deliberate return to 1980s economic principles. If we trace the narrative the video presents, it starts way back with Paul Keating's 1980s reforms. Those are praised for taxing investments rather than just income. But then, we jump to the late 1990s and early 2000s under John Howard. This is when capital gains tax discounts and widespread negative gearing were introduced, and the video claims this is the exact moment the economy was thrown off track. Fast forward to the 2022 election victory, and finally, today's budget by Jim Chalmers. The source argues this is the exact moment Australia begins to reverse those late 90s policies, essentially hitting the reset button to go back to the 80s model.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the housing investment problem. So the source's primary grievance here is how past tax policies allegedly created a massive housing lockout, especially for millennials and Zoomers. To really get this, we have to look at the exact financial mechanisms that incentivized what they call a stagnant investment class. First up, the capital gains tax, or CGT. Quite simply, this is just a tax you pay on the profits made from the sale of your investments. Well, the video argues that when the tax on these profits was literally halved a quarter of a century ago, it created this huge incentive for people to just park their money in existing assets, like housing, rather than actually putting it to productive use.
And then, of course, we have negative gearing. This is a tax strategy where losses from an investment property are deducted from your overall taxable income. The video controversially labels this the original sin of the John Howard era. According to the source, this specific mechanism basically rigged the economy. How? By making it incredibly profitable for wealthy individuals to hoard existing properties, outbidding younger generations who are just trying to buy their first home, all while legally minimizing their own tax bills.
So the crucial takeaway here is that the combination of these two specific tax policies allegedly created what the video forcefully calls a Ponzi scheme. The source presents this really fascinating paradox. You've got an entire generation of older Australians who are technically millionaires on paper because of their property portfolios. But paradoxically, they can't afford to actually buy another house if they sell because the market has inflated so aggressively. Meanwhile, younger generations, they are entirely locked out of ownership.
All right, moving into Section 3, shifting wealth to innovation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the budget's proposed solution, actively redirecting capital away from housing and throwing it into forward-thinking industries. The source draws a really sharp contrast between two completely different types of wealth generation. On one hand, you have what the video calls lazy or stagnant wealth, literally just buying up existing real estate and waiting for it to go up in value. As they put it, we don't need more investment in caves. On the other hand, you have productive wealth. We're talking venture capital, cancer research, actually setting up new businesses that innovate and add tangible value to society. The video highlights that this budget introduces very specific tax breaks for venture capital and innovation, heavily incentivizing this productive side of the board.
Up next, Section 4, closing family trust loopholes.
Now, the analysis shifts focus to a lesser-known but highly impactful target of the budget. The source uses this incredible, colorful metaphor, referring to family trusts as the family piggy bank. The video claims that extremely wealthy individuals are using these trusts to park their assets and essentially avoid paying their fair share of taxes. It's framed as this massive loophole that allows wealth to be shielded directly from the taxman. Let's actually break down the exact step-by-step mechanics the source claims are being abused here. Step 1. Substantial wealth is generated from a business or property. Step 2. Instead of holding it personally, those assets are shoved into a family trust. Step 3. The income generated by those assets is then distributed, at least on paper, to lower-earning family members, maybe kids who are in much lower tax brackets. And finally, Step 4. The overall family tax burden is heavily minimized. The video argues that by cracking down on this very specific structure, the budget targets a major avenue of tax minimization used by the wealthiest electorates.
Let's look at Section 5, expanding the housing supply.
Now, what's really interesting here is how the budget attempts to fix the immediate housing crisis for younger generations through direct supply-side intervention. Just look at the 75-25 breakdown in the government's Help to Buy scheme. Under this model, if you're genuinely struggling to buy a house, you purchase, say, 75% of it, and the government essentially co-owns the remaining 25%. This significantly lowers your immediate mortgage burden, right? When you eventually sell the house, the government simply takes back its 25% share alongside any capital gains, which the source notes is then used to expand the exact same program for the next person in line.
To actually fuel these kinds of programs, the video highlights a truly massive figure, $50 billion. The source cites this as the government's total ongoing investment in housing. It's a staggering number, and it's used directly to push back against critics who try to claim the government isn't doing enough to intervene in the market.
To quickly summarize this whole approach, the video points out multiple strategies that are working together simultaneously. We have the 5% deposit guarantee helping people save a lot faster. We have the Help to Buy co-ownership scheme we just went over. We have clear signals to property developers to invest in new builds rather than hoarding existing properties. And crucially, the source points to a massive push for increasing worker wages overall, which obviously makes affording a home more realistic in the first place.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, a long-term economic vision.
The core assertion of the whole video is that this budget isn't just about winning the next election. It is a long-term economic play. But hey, you can't exactly plan for the future if the present is falling apart, right? So, this source points out the $20 billion in oil shock relief included in the budget. This is meant to demonstrate that while the government is planning for massive, long-term structural changes, it's also spending heavily right now to stabilize the immediate day-to-day cost of living crises facing the nation.
And the video concludes its analysis with this honestly wonderful metaphor. Great decisions are made when old men plant trees that they will never see the fruits of. The source emphasizes that reversing decades of economic policy is kind of like injecting chemo into an economic cancer. It is absolutely not going to have an immediate overnight effect on housing prices. Instead, these are slow-acting reforms meant to bear fruit for future generations.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely crucial question. Will closing these tax loopholes successfully shift Australia from a property-based economy to an innovation-based one? Because that is the grand experiment the source believes this budget is kicking off. I highly encourage you to keep exploring this topic, watch the numbers as they unfold, and keep learning. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.